am inside the lovely SUV crossover, the luxury SUV crossover of Alfa Romeo Stelvio. I'm in the south of Turkey, on the Aegean coast. I've just picked up this beautiful car, thanks to our good friends over at Alfa Romeo Dubai, Fiat Chrysler Middle East, and their Turkish counterparts, Tofaş and the Koç Group over here in Turkey. Now, my plan is to head out on a historical journey on two very interesting locations for myself. Not in any particular order. One is Bodrum, ancient Halicarnassus, and the other ancient city of Ephesus, which is located in the modern Turkish town of Selçuk. Now, both of these amazing places have seen every single civilization, from the Greeks, the Romans, Alexander the Great, the Persians, the Knights, the Crusaders, the Selçuk Turks, the Ottomans, and finally ended up in the Turkish Republic. So they are both hotbeds for history, and I've always been interested. So I'm going to use this lovely Alfa Romeo Stelvio. This is a 2-liter variety, which is bright red alpha color, which I love, to get around on my Aegean adventure, explore a couple of these locations, and well, head back to Dubai once it's all done. My first stop on our Aegean tour is the ancient city of Ephesus. Now, for over 30 years, when my grandparents brought me here, I've always remained fascinated about this wonderful ancient city. Now, once upon a time, this was a port city, first ruled by the Greeks in antiquity and then by the Romans. During the Roman time, it would become one of the most prominent Mediterranean port cities, and like many ancient cities throughout its history, Ephesus was conquered by many civilizations. The Lydians, Ionians, Greeks, Romans, Selçuks, the Persians, and today it sits within the Turkish Republic. Now, the city's foundations are believed to lie with an Ionian prince, Androclus, who was accredited with establishing the city all the way back in the 11th century BC. Legend has it that the prince looked for guidance from Delphian oracles, and the oracles told him that a boar and a fish somehow would show him the location of the city. Sure enough, Androclus was frying fish over fire. The fish jumps out, a little bit of flame gets out with it, out of the pan, and then the bushes catch fire. A wild boar comes running out of the bushes, and then Androclus says, this is what the Delphi oracle said, this is where Ephesus will be, and then the rest is history. Now, that's a very, very brief part of Ephesus history, and now we're gonna go right into the video. But please bear in mind that we shot this video back in the day when my video making career was in its early days, and my brother AK kindly helped me as the director and the cameraman, so we were kind of a two-man show, quite an amateur show, but you know, I think we got the job done. Now, in this part of the video, we'll be visiting the magnificent ancient theater, Library of Celsus, Street, which is one of the main streets, and the ancient bathrooms, no less. Now, without further ado, let's begin our tour of ancient Ephesus. I'm standing here on Arcadian, otherwise known as Harbour Street, in the ancient city of Ephesus. The Greeks that developed it, and it was the Romans that turned it into the grandest of all cities in all of Asia Minor. At its height, about 250,000 inhabitants. Now, this is Arcadian, the Harbour Street, and this is where everybody who arrived to this city would have come in from. The harbour used to be just down there, about 800 meters that way. It isn't anymore. It's more like 9 kilometers away now, and that's due to earthquakes and the sea kind of pulling itself back. But all guests would arrive from the harbour, which means they would come up from this grand street, which at one time was covered, and there were arches and grand structures to kind of welcome them. Now, the legend has it that Mark Antony and Cleopatra came here for their honeymoon. And that was when all this marble roadway, this walkway, which was, the whole area was, you know, tiled in marble as well. And they washed the road with red wine. And they say, the legend has it, historians seem to agree that that is actually the, where the red carpet came from, when this was all washed with red wine in their honor. And that is the reason why we walk on red carpets during movie premieres. Now, walking up from the Arcadian into the city, you would immediately be greeted by this humongous theater that I'm gonna walk up into. And there was a very good reason for that. The Greeks did it so that the Romans, so that anybody that would come into the city would be greeted by this magnificent, colossal structure to kind of cement the idea in their minds that these were all big, great cities, and of course they were powerful and that they were rich. Of course, the theater was somewhat smaller in Greek times, and when the Romans came, that's what they liked doing. They made it larger and bigger, and I'm gonna walk into it right now. Now I'm as high as I can get up in the Grand Theater in the ancient city of Ephesus. Now this theater is believed to have been here even pre-Hellenistic, so pre-Greek times, but it was the Romans, the emperors Trajan and Domitian, that really built it into what it is today, what the surviving structure is today, and that is a 24,000 capacity humongous theater, certainly the largest in Asia Minor. From the antiquity age. Now, the Greeks and the Romans would traditionally build their theaters against a hill or a mountain, and this is exactly where it is. So that back there is the Arcadian, the Harbour Street that I just walked up from. As soon as you walk up, you encounter this humongous theater. Now, in the Greek times, when the theater was a lot smaller, you could have a wonderful view, a vista across there, and don't forget the sea used to be there just about 800 to a kilometer down, 800 meters to a kilometer down. Well, in the Roman times the sea was still there, but the Romans kind of attached more importance to the arts and well, I don't want to say more importance, but they saw it in a different way, let's say. So they built a grand stage right there. You can see the remains there. So it was a huge 3-story stage, effectively blocking the view, blocking the sea view from the audience. Now the Greeks believed that if you were bored with a performance, you could always have a look at the wonderful view. The Romans didn't agree with that. Now, in the Roman times, this place, in addition to being used for the arts, it was actually used for gladiatorial games in the later stages. Now, as you walk up the Harbour Street, and then you see the magnificent theater, and then you come up a huge marble road, which would have been hustling and bustling with tradesmen and so on. Then you come across this amazing structure behind me, perhaps the piece de la resistance in ancient Ephesus. It's the Library of Celsus. Now, Celsus was the governor of Ephesus, and his son, Julius Aquila, built the library in his honor. Back in the day, I think in his heyday, it had about 12,000 papyrus books in there. As the antiquity libraries go, this was number 3. Number 1 was in Alexandria, patron being Cleopatra, and number 2 in Bergama, which also happens to be in modern-day Turkey. Now, apart from the library and how magnificent it is, there is a very interesting story, because the store that I'm standing in right now, this building that you can kind of see right now, is, well, was actually, the proprietor was a madam called Calice, and she was the owner of one of the oldest known professions in the world. I'm not going to say any more, but I think you get the gist. Now, the legend has it that Julius Aquila runs out of money when building this magnificent library behind me. So Calice comes with a deal for him. She says, I will fund the rest of the building of the Grand Celsus Library only if you send punters, so clients, my way. So they come to an agreement, and although it hasn't actually been found, apparently there is a secret tunnel underneath. So that comes from the library and into this love house, shall we say. So men of Ephesus would regularly go to the library, perhaps a little more often than they would usually, and they would use that secret tunnel to come into the pleasure of Madame Calice, spend a couple of hours here in the love house, and off they went. No one was the wiser, but the city had a magnificent library, and we're happy. Calice was happy. It was a happy city all around. Now, I'm being very serious when I say this, but shortly I'm going to take you to the public toilets in Ephesus, and there's a very good reason for that. Now, in ancient times, there weren't a huge lot of distractions, obviously. No mobile phones, travel was more restricted, and cafes and restaurants and so on and so forth weren't as common as they are today. So people would socialize in places like bathhouses. But another place they would socialize would be public toilets. Now, just across the street there, and I'm going to take you guys in there, is a public toilet, the largest in ancient Ephesus, with 47 toilets, so water closets, very similar actually to the ones that are used, as we would call them, hole in the wall type of thing, or hole in the ground type of thing, that are used across many parts of the world even now. Now, people would go into these bathrooms, and they had one or two things. Either you were a regular punter, so you would go, pay, use the bathroom, have your chat, and then come out. Or if you were a or if you were a wealthy person, then you would actually have your own bathroom allocated. So, and you would have your initial inscribed in there. Plus, you would actually have a toilet man who would, because don't forget, these are marble bathrooms, so you would have a chap that would go in 10-15 minutes before, sit on that toilet for you, warm it up so that you can go in and do your business in as comfortable as you could be. How many thousands of years ago it was. So now I'm gonna take you in there and show you the one of the most important places where ancient Ephesians socialized, did the business. There was even entertainment. There's actually a little bit in the middle of it that provided entertainment, singers and performers with harps and violin-like instruments. But let's go have a look now. So, for example, this is a very good, precise example of what I was talking about. There is an E inscribed into that hole in the ground. So, have a look. That would have been a wealthy chap. And that would have been where the performers would be playing music and entertaining the the toilet goers. Unfortunately, the audio here isn't very good, but what I'm basically describing is this is Dr. Alexandrios, and he was a famous doctor in ancient Ephesus. And the statue, the headless statue that you see there, is, as a matter of fact, an ancient advertising board. So Dr. Alexandrios would have put that statue of himself, of course, with a head on there, as advertisement, and below where you can see this plaque is where he would have his details. So this would effectively serve as advertisement, ancient advertisement, as a matter of fact, which I find particularly fascinating. It's absolutely, one of the most interesting things I've seen in Ephesus. Now the Gate of Hercules is right behind me. Now that's the line between the Acropolis and the lower side of things. But the important thing to know here is, as you come here, there are two roads, one to the left, one to the right, that you can take your chariots on. So onto the big grand Cura Street, I believe, the street that's named after the high priestesses. That one, it's a pedestrian-only street with all the shops and the tradesmen and that kind of thing. But if you want to take your chariot up or down, you have these streets over there and over there. I'm going to turn the camera around and show it to you fully. Those haven't been fully excavated, but those would have been the ones that go up to the houses that are being kind of dug up only recently. There's been a huge archaeological investment there, about $10 million, done by foreign companies and Turkish companies alike, to excavate those hill townhouses where the very wealthy lived. We'll go in them in a little while. And then more dwellings would have been on this side. Let's not forget, this is a city of 250,000 people at its peak, so a lot of dwellings would have been necessary. So going back to what I was saying, as you come here, you have two roads, one to the left, one to the right, and that's where all sorts of tradesmen, dignitaries, what have you, would have gone with their chariots. I thought that was interesting. Now what you're about to see is a little version of the Grand Theatre. It greets us all as we enter Ephesus from the sea. So this is the Bouleuterion, the Odean. It was a theatre that was used for the arts, but mainly it was part of the governmental, the administrative structure of Ephesus, because this is where the governor, the senators, so on and so forth, would come and address the other members of the higher classes, the ruling classes, the citizens, and so on and so forth. And this theater, as you can see, is a lot smaller. It's about 1,500 people. The Bouleuterion held real significance, because this is where decisions would be taken, debates would be had. I'm standing here right in the middle of the State Agora. So this is in the Acropolis, the higher part of the city, where only the wealthy and the government officials, the senators, the governor, the high priestesses, so on and so forth, were allowed to roam, along with foreign dignitaries and that kind of thing. So this was very much the administrative side of the of ancient Ephesus. Right there behind me, you could see the Bouleuterion, where we just came in from. So this area would have been heavily built up. Around here, where you see some of those columns on the floor now, would have been full of offices, and in those offices there would have been taxmen and government officials and business people and so on and so forth. So this would have been kind of like Parliament Square, really. I guess that's a good way of comparing it. And this is, again, like I say, would have been the beating heart of where all the decisions would have been taken, where all the influential people and the governing people of Ephesus would have roamed around in. Right outside of what is the ancient city of Ephesus right now lies the Temple of Artemis. Now, you can see the column right behind me. The Temple of Artemis was the largest one ever built for the Greek goddess ever in the ancient world. It was actually part of the 7 wonders of the ancient world when it was up. Now it's just that column, which stands about 16 meters tall. It was originally about 18, so slightly larger than it is. So Artemis was a Greek goddess, later known as Diana in the Roman times. This ground here was where the temple stood. Back in ancient Ephesian days, of course, this was very much part of the city. The city was massive. It had 127 of those columns around. It was very grand, a place where people would socialize as well as pray to the god of fertility, Artemis, of course. Now, there are a couple of reasons why there isn't a lot of this magnificent 127 column Artemis temple left for us to see. First and foremost, because it's very old. Secondly, there was a flood back in ancient times. Third, a madman called Herostratus, who wanted to be famous by way of arson, so by way of being an arsonist, actually came and burnt this magnificent grand temple to the ground. That's another big reason. Then when mythology was out and Christianity was in, the Christians came and they dismantled this grand structure, used all the relevant good bits to construct cathedrals. Actually, one of those cathedrals was Hagia Sophia, which now stands tall in Istanbul, which later got converted into a mosque, actually. So apart from that, in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, the Brits came here for excavation purposes, and of course what they did was they built a great big railways. They like building railways. They've always done so throughout their colonial history. So what they did was they built a train all the way down to shore, and the shore back in those days, well, the 50s, was where it is pretty much today, about 9 or 10 kilometers down that way. So they built the train tracks. They took all the remaining good bits that the Christians hadn't taken or Herostratus hadn't burnt down and so on and so forth, and they shipped them to the British Museum, and it is now preserved there. Now, I personally haven't seen it, but now that I've discovered that the remains are there, I'm very much interested to go see what is left and how they've preserved it. Now, it is a little bit windy here because I'm standing under these humongous pine trees, which wouldn't have been here, but I can't imagine the nature to be of much different 2,000 years ago here. Maybe a little bit more fertile, if anything. Now, I'm here in the Commercial Agora. So this is the commercial hub of ancient Ephesus. This place would have had 80 or 90 stores and shops. Tradesmen would have lined them up, and all commercial activity in the city in ancient Ephesus would have happened in this Commercial Agora. Something very, very interesting in this Commercial Agora is you have two entrances. One is over there by the mighty theater. That's where the grand theater, that's where goods would have come in. And the other one is over there. That's where tradesmen or anybody else entering the, any outsider entering the Commercial Agora would have to come through. That's the pedestrian one, that is the goods one. Now, the city has 3 baths around each entrance, and if you were an outsider and you wanted to enter the Commercial Agora and you've just disembarked from your vessel at port, you would have to take a bath in order to fend off any kind of disease, any kind of unwanted germs to enter the city. My good friend Dr. Alexandrios would have probably thought otherwise, but it was for the greater good of the Ephesians. Now, it's a lovely breeze here. Furthermore, you see where the stores are? Those would have been covered, so the columns, on top of the columns would have been cloth shade all around in order to keep the tradesmen cool and dry in the winter. Now this is really a huge agora here, and it kind of puts everything into perspective. You know, this whole city, you disembark, you come in, you see the massive theater, then you go on a marble street. As you go through there, you come onto the Curious marble street that goes up, again, full of tradesmen. That leads you up to the Acropolis, where the governmental offices are. That's where the heart beats in terms of government and high-ranking officials and so on. Then as you come down, or as you go up, depending on your perspective, you have the Library of Celsus over there, the grandest structure here, and rebuilt in the early 70s. So when you actually come to Ephesus, you can really enjoy it in its near-on its former glory. Then as you come out from there, you end up in the Commercial Agora. Commercial Agora, again, just imagine how busy this would have been, how much this place would have come alive with 250,000 inhabitants, and on top of that, people just coming here to do all sorts of trade. And then afterwards, you go out of the gates. We're gonna kind of break the mold here and not use the pedestrian entrance, because that hasn't really been fully excavated. We're gonna use the goods entrance to exit the city, and that is going to be the end of our wonderful tour in Ephesus. But it's not the end of my day, because Ephesus and that grand theater is against, well, the whole kind of city is against the wonderful Mount Pion. Now or it's a hill really, but they call it Mount Pion. Now as you go up Mount Pion, you have the house of the Virgin Mary. So this is where Virgin Mary would have spent her final years, largely accepted and funded by the Vatican, that place. So I'm going to take it as a historical fact. Now in order to get up to Mount Pion, I'm going to use my wonderful Alfa Romeo Stelvio that has got me here initially and all around Turkey on my little journey around the Aegean historical sites. So I'm going to look forward to taking the Alfa up those windy roads, and more than likely going to use the paddle shift.